So when we started our homeschool journey, it came out of the blue. We started for geographical reasons and also because I wasn't ready to send my oldest child out of the home. I loved having him home. I loved watching him explore and play and learn, and the idea of missing hours and hours of his life made me sad. So we began with a version of public school supported homeschool, as many people do in the beginning, which did let me keep him close to home, but we soon found out that reporting our learning hours each week and recording our time on each subject did not work well for us. One day, my dad called me from work and told me to turn the radio on to a specific station. When I did, I heard a familiar voice. Our friend, a local radio personality, was talking about a new concept I had never heard of before, a leadership education. What's that? I sat on the floor right by our old yellow boombox and listened while my kids played nearby. When it was over, my dad called again and said, "I think that's what you need to do." I knew he was right. I could feel it. But it was all these new concepts and this whole new way of doing things, and I felt horribly inadequate and immediately overwhelmed. But my good dad believed in it so much that he paid for both of us to go to a seminar. He came with me to help me juggle my youngest, who was only a few months old at the time, and we learned together. My parents have always been incredibly supportive of this homeschooling project of ours, and I am so grateful. What I didn't know that day was that I was embarking on a completely new way of thinking. I was at the beginning of many seminars, forums, homeschool conferences, books, studies, and I was just meeting some of the people who would change my life forever, though I'm sure I didn't realize it at the time. As a prerequisite to that first seminar, my dad and I read the book A Thomas Jefferson Education by Oliver Vandemille, and the author was the main speaker at the event. I can't even express how that book and that seminar shifted my thinking. Dr. DeMille is inspired, and I'm so grateful that my dad stumbled upon the information we needed at that time. Again, I feel that our steps were guided on our path, and now I can't imagine life any other way. We learned so many important principles and new ideas, which were actually old ideas brought back to life, and that is how we jumped into a new, old way of home education with both feet. One of the first concepts we were introduced to is that there are 4 phases of learning that a child naturally experiences. This knowledge has been like a roadmap for me as I have observed and learned with my kids. It helped us time and time again, along with the 7 keys of great learning, to triangulate on the next steps we needed to take. I will explain briefly the 4 phases, just the way I learned it, so you may have the benefit of it for your own schooling plans. The best way I ever heard the 4 phases described is like a planet. Each phase is a layer that builds upon the last layer. The very center of the planet and the part that supports all of the outer layers is fittingly called core phase. Dr. DeMille explains that core phase is between the ages of 0 to 8, give or take 100 years. I love that he gives those parameters because it teaches us that every child is an individual and that we each learn at our own speed, and that's okay. So, in core phase, you're building the child's core. What do you want in their core? It is less about skills and more about character, is what I've realized. So you want to think of ways to teach them family values, a good work ethic, and who they are. Dr. DeMille says this is when you teach them right and wrong, good and bad, true and false, and that you do it through 4 four-letter words: work, play, home, and love. The next phase is love of learning. This is such a fun phase, filled with curiosity and questions and exploration of their interests. This phase is generally ages 9 to 12, give or take 100 years. Dr. DeMille likens this phase to a butterfly, flying from one flower to the next, tasting of the nectar of each one along the way. This is a time for them to learn to truly love learning, and it is wonderful if it is done well. I observed that to be true in my kids, as one day my little girl would be enthralled by dragons, so we would immerse ourselves in dragon lore until she was full. This is a time for them to learn to truly love learning, and it is wonderful if it is done well. I observed that to be true in my kids, as one day my little girl would be enthralled by dragons, so we would immerse ourselves in dragon lore until she was full. Then she wanted to do art, so out came the arts and crafts tubs, and she feasted on that for a week or so. Then she wanted to dance and nothing else, so we found a dance class and dance videos, and we moved our bodies. To me, this phase is when they want to learn a little bit about everything and they are establishing their habits, so it is a time of chores and duties and a bit more structured time. Naturally, this phase leads to the next, which they reach during ages 12 to 18, give or take 100 years. This phase is called scholar phase, and it builds on the super important love of learning phase. I couldn't believe it until it happened in our home, but this is a time when a person develops more depth in the interests that they once explored in their love of learning phase. There is less flitting from subject to subject and more in-depth exploration of each topic they find themselves immersed in. This is a time when, believe it or not, a student will ask for undisturbed study time of up to 10 hours a day, sometimes even more, and it is often self-guided. They're developing deeper knowledge, greater self-mastery, important study skills, and a sense of direction. This is a time when parents can entrust this child with a stewardship, which is different from chores in important ways. The outer shell in this planet analogy is called depth phase and encompasses ages 18 to 22, give or take 100 years of course. This is a time of preparation and application and is actually followed by a secret outer phase called mission phase, or probably actually many more phases that last throughout a person's life. In depth phase, a person is finding ways to practice applying themselves in leadership roles that matter to them. It is a time when they are learning deeply who they are and what they're here on this earth to do. This is when they begin preparing themselves for the service they want to provide to humanity and to the world. It is surely a time of study and exploration, and it is when they begin to apply that work ethic they have learned over and over along the way. I read and studied all I could about these phases, and I taught them to my kids. I wanted them to know where they are and that it is a normal, natural progression. But I also wanted them to realize that if they need to, they can always go back and visit core phase and have a day of play, or they could revisit the love of learning phase and have a day of feasting on something that interests them. I also wanted our family to know these phases because if something was off, we could always ask ourselves which phase needed a little attention, and it would almost always snap us right back into shape. I personally think that most of society's problems could be fixed if we all went back and made sure our core phase was strong. My challenge to you is to ponder which phase each of your children is in and how you can help them strengthen that phase. My challenge to you is to ponder which phase each of your children is in and how you can help them to strengthen that phase. So, as they transition to the next phase and the next, their little planet of learning is healthy and won't collapse on itself.